This is A Conversation With, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Ray, Executive Vice President of Human Capital here at the Conference Board, and I'm very excited to bring to you another podcast in our series, A Conversation With, some of the world's greatest thinkers and human capital leaders. And today, it's Chester Elton. I'm so excited to have him with me here in the studio. And you know, Chester probably doesn't need an introduction to many of our listeners. We know his work. He's been called the Apostle of Appreciation by Canada's Globe and Mail. Creative and Refreshing by the New York Times, and he's just a award-winning, best-selling author on the New York Times list for some books like All In and The Carrot Principle and The Best Team Wins. His books have been translated into more than 30 languages and have sold more than 1.5 million copies. He's often quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Fast Company, the New York Times. He's been on NBC Today, CNN, ABC, MSNBC. He's been everywhere. And he's been picked as one of the top gurus in the world in terms of the world's leadership experts. And he's part of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches, which is a pay-it-forward project. So Elton's currently, the founder of the Culture Works, and it's in that capacity that I've had a chance to work with him. That's a global training company that tries to help people build really engaging cultures and decent people and decent managers. Elton is the co-founder of the Culture Works, which is a global training company, and its mission is to try to help people build engaging and respectful and really fabulous places to work, that kind of culture. And it's in that capacity that I've had a chance to get to know Chester and to work with him over the years. He's also on the advisory board of Camp Corral, which is a nonprofit for children of wounded and fallen military heroes. And he's just a terrific guy. It's hard to be in his presence and not be excited. So I'm thrilled to have you here with me today, Chester, and just welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great introduction. And anyway, always delighted to be with you. As we always say, I'm the president of your fan club. You're the president of my fan club. So it's always great to be in the presence of the immortal, the myth, the legend, Rebecca Ray.
Well, listen, I'm thrilled that you're with us. We like to do these podcasts because for me, it's just a real pleasure to have a chance to really get to share with others what I love about people. And thrilled that you're here today. So let's just jump right in. So I know you've been studying culture for, I don't know how many years, but quite a few years, Chester. And I know that a lot of people look to you in one capacity or another, either as a consultant or a keynote speaker or a variety of things. And I'm wondering if over the years that you've been working in this space, what's different and what's the same?
It's a great question. You look at the traditions of cultures over the years, and we've been studying for just over 20 years. And you go back to, when you and I were first getting into the workplace, it was very hierarchical. It was very top down. Knowledge was power, and so it was kept very close. I used to love the explanation from my bosses. What they'd say, I'd ask a question, and they'd say, "Well, Chester, that's on a need-to-know basis, and you're never going to need to know."
And we're not going to read you in.
Right, exactly. And what has changed dramatically, of course, is the smartphone, the internet, Glassdoor, where I love the expression as I'm coaching executives, and I'll say, you think they don't know? Trust me, they know. They know everything. So transparency has really become the watchword and has really been part of really engaging and I would say fun cultures where we all kind of know what's going on. We know how to pitch in. We know where we're going. We know how we're going to get there. And it becomes much more engaging. So one of the big changes, I think, is just the transparency and the availability of information. Would you agree?
I think that's right. I think the other thing is that I think senior leaders get how important culture is. You can get an awful lot of things right as you run a business, but if you can't get the culture right, you're going to be pushing a rock up a hill like Sisyphus for a long time.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. Sisyphus, by the way, played center field for the Mets, I think, last season. I think the other thing that we're talking about there is leaders understand that there are very few differentiators left in business. Yeah, right? Leaders are always going to be a differentiator. You can never have too many good leaders. The second one, and I believe there are only two left, leadership and culture. The reason being, it's hard to replicate. Mm-hmm. Your competition can replicate your products, services, pricing, locales, and so on. Culture, that's that emotional engagement to work. And you're right. More and more leaders are understanding that if you don't get the culture right, nothing else much matters.
And it's not difficult, but it's not easy to build a culture, right? I mean, you have to be conscious about what you want. You have to have, motivations and behaviors that align with the values that you espouse. But it is so easy to ruin, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's like building a reputation. It can take you a lifetime to build it.
Yep.
And a matter of minutes to lose it. This is where I think leadership, again, becomes really important, because who you have at the top sets those parameters. All the things that end up on the posters and on the website. The thing that makes leadership behavior, and you touched on it, so important, is the way the leaders behave give everyone else permission to act the same way. How many times have you at the conference board studied a toxic culture to find that, well, it started with the leader? The way he or she conducted themselves, if they were not integral, if they were not, someone you could really rely on or trustworthy or truthful, that permeates the whole organization. So again, starts at the leader, get the culture right. The way you act as a leader gives everybody else permission to act the same way.
That's true. I mean, everything is tone at the top.
Yep.
It's what that senior leader will allow and permit, or what they give an opening for, right?
Yeah, what they'll give a wink and a nod to, and what they'll, bring out the whooping stick, as my mother used to say.
Well, I want to set that strong visual image aside, but I've worked at companies where, the values were on marble plaques on the wall. And then right after a perp walk had just occurred, you'd see the holes where the plaques were. So, a value has to be an awful lot more than a written word somewhere. Absolutely.
Your behaviors say everything about your culture and who you are and what you're all about. It's interesting that more and more culture is being looked at. The investment firms are starting to look at not just bottom line, they're starting to look at culture. In mergers and acquisitions, it's not so much the product meshing as do the cultures mesh. And now you're seeing even the SEC is now looking at what are your investments in your people. We want to know, how do you attract, how do you retain, what are your benefits, what are your leadership growth programs. More and more important to be people focused. And now you can see it's being legislated, which I think is going to be a really interesting inflection point.
Oh, you have that right. So when things are reportable, all of a sudden that's going to get an awful lot more attention. And you want to talk about transparency?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are going to be not quite as comfortable knowing that all of this is going to be on full display. And to your point, information is just about everywhere. It's now about character. It's now about reputation, and it's about finding a place to work where that company's values, the mission, align with your own. Because no one wants to do the mental calculation every day of how much of my soul do I have to leave at the door when I walk in.
Exactly. Well, the fact is that nobody works 9 to 5 anymore. And that's another huge shift in culture. I mean, I remember being able to leave work and nobody could get a hold of you.
That's why I like to fly.
That's right.
Although they're ruining that now because they have, internet in the air. So I got to rethink this.
So that along that line, work is now life and life is work. I love the old country song. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. We can go for a drink, right?
Jimmy Buffett is my idol.
There you go. And work has become very much the same. You're expected to respond to a text or an email within minutes, regardless of if it's 6 a.m. in the morning or it's at 10:30 at night. And so when you talk about character and you talk about building these cultures, your work is your life is your work. And that's why I love the new generations that are coming up that are saying, look, to your point, I'm not going to sell my soul. I'm going to have work-life harmony. I'm going to be involved in something that I can be proud of, that has impact, where I'm making a difference. And my contributions will be acknowledged and celebrated. So more and more, this issue of character and culture and leadership, it's everything.
Yep. And you're seeing how the workplaces are changing, and legislation usually follows that, right? And so you're seeing some countries, some organizations having a policy around not sending emails at odd hours, or nothing on the weekend, or not after certain working hours. And it is tough when the technology is both a blessing and a curse. And when you can be always on, there are some organizations that decide you will be always on, and that's not good for morale. It's not good for personal mental health.
Exactly. And you referenced my favorite country there, Germany, where you have to turn off the company email system. I think it's either at 5 or 6 o'clock. A friend of mine who's a lawyer from New York went to Germany, and he was working late, and his boss came and said, "Hey, what are you doing? We're going to get fined. You got to shut that thing down. Go home." I'll tell you the other thing that I think is really interesting, Rebecca, and you see the shift coming. The World Bank has a mission to eradicate poverty by 2030. One of the things they've done, and you mentioned it earlier, what's measured gets noticed or shamed.
Pick your word.
Right, and they've got now this list of the Human Capital Index, countries that invest in their hospitals, in their schools, in their health care, and so on. And they've ranked like the 175 members of the UN. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of countries that you think would be in the top 10 that are not. And this idea of take the long view, and that's what I think is so hard for companies and countries. Take the long view. We're always looking for that low-hanging fruit, for the quarterly report, to get reelected. We don't invest in those long-term projects, and that's what the World Bank, and I think that's what the SEC and other organizations and governments are trying to do. Say, look, we've got to take the long view. We've got to invest today for 20 years from now. As the CEO or as the president or the governor, you're going to be long gone, but please don't mortgage the future for a short-term win. And that comes back to what you talked about. That's character and that's leadership.
Yeah, and taking that long view is a distinct choice. But we're quite often hounded by the quarterly earnings call and a variety of other measures. And so I think the legislation is going to have to relax some of that to give people the breathing space to do this, because otherwise you're sort of on a treadmill and feel as though you really can't jump off, right?
Exactly. And I think what gets fun is where you say, okay, so who does this well? Who are the companies that do it well? And one of my favorite companies to talk about is WD-40. I know you have a can. Don't we all? I remember my dad saying, look, here's a can of WD-40 and here's a roll of duct tape. If it moves and it shouldn't, use the duct tape. If it doesn't move and it should, use the WD-40 and it will solve 90% of your problems.
Well, I think that has just made the podcast. I mean, that's good advice.
That one bit of parental advice will keep you in good stead for generations. Well, there's a wonderful leader there named Gary Ridge, Garry. And you should write that name down. You should Google him. He took over WD-40, and they had a market cap of about $250 million. Not a bad-sized little company. I think it's 10 or 12 years he's been at the helm. They now have a market cap of $2.5 billion.
Well done.
One would say that's good growth. And it's really interesting if you ask Gary, how did you do it? And he said, you know what? We created a tribal culture. And in a tribe, you look out for each other, you defend each other, you love each other. And he says, and that is the basis of literally everything we do. It's we look out for each other. He tells a great story that I want to relate to you. He says, in the economic downturn, 2009, 2010, 2008, right in there, he says, I'm touring the company, and they've got factories all over the world, right? And he says, people kept saying, hey, Gary, are you okay? Like, are you okay? And he said, it was universal. He says, I went back to my hotel room, and I looked in the mirror. Do I look ill? Like, am I giving off this?
Am I drooling?
Yeah. Do I look terminal,
Yeah.
And he called his wife and he says, the most interesting thing's happening. People are asking me, how am I doing? And she said, Gary, they're not asking you, how are you doing? They're asking, how are we doing?
That's right.
Right? Because they're hearing all this bad news from their friends, that are getting laid off and sold and going out of business. And he said, and you'll love this, Rebecca, he says, and it came to my attention that, well, we shouldn't waste a good crisis. And so he went out to his people and he said, look, I understand there's a lot of pressure, a lot of bad news. We're not laying off anybody. We're not cutting back on bonuses and commissions. In fact, we're going to take our reserves and we're going to invest in you to develop your talents and expertise so that when this passes, and it will, we'll be ready. And the first year after the economic crisis, they grew over 30%.
That's fabulous.
And it has skyrocketed since then. And he said, isn't it interesting? A crisis can take you one of two ways.
Yeah.
Up or down. He says, for us, because we had our tribe, it took us up. I love that story.
Well, I've got a similar story that came from employees. So I had the good fortune to be at Michelin North America down in Greenville. And they had a panel. We were talking about culture and employee engagement and whatnot. And so I think they shut down one of the production lines, and I had a panel of like 18 people. Okay, after I got over my feelings of, oh my God, I've never seen a panel so big in my life, they talked about what it meant to work for Michelin. And there was one gentleman who told the story that he had worked very hard to get every certification and, training and moving up the ranks. And there was a downturn, and his position was going to be eliminated. So what they did was they offered this gentleman a very menial job. And he took it, much less pay, but he could continue to work. And then when things got better, they put him back in his old role, paid him the differential for what he lost during those years.
Oh, my God.
You want to talk about a loyal employee?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to talk about family, tribes? I mean, really, there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
And, those are the moments of true character and leadership.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I love the story of Texas Roadhouse, Kent Taylor, who you and I both love and admire. He sets up this fund called Andy's Outreach. Their mascot is this armadillo with a cowboy hat.
That's the dead thing on the road, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Tastes like chicken. Anyway.
No, I lived in the South. Not everything tastes like chicken. That's a lie. That's a lie.
Well, what they have is this employee panel, much like you're describing. And if there's any unusual financial crisis that comes up for an employee, maybe they've lost their car or an unexpected medical bill or whatever, the panel then steps in and will pay that bill. When they had those hurricanes in the South and some of the restaurants were destroyed, they paid their salaries in full until those restaurants were repaired and came up. And then again, you talk about what does that mean emotionally to these employees? Well, you can't put a price on it.
Nope, you can't. Now, Chester, I know you've done a lot of work with teams. Worked with you learned quite a bit from some of the presentations that you've made. And, a lot of those are multi-generational. And, we have, 5, soon to be 4, generations in the workplace. And so, tell me more about that. And, what were some key takeaways from that research?
Yes, we started to look at the foundational principles of teams are always going to be there, trust and mission and vision and so on. When we started to look at the modern day team, specifically in those 5 generations, said, well, are there generational differences and do we need to pay attention? And it was very evident again that times had changed dramatically. Old school was we would treat everybody the same, that's fair. Very much the mantra of most HR departments. You'd ask for an exception and say, well, if we make an exception for you.
Right.
And the new mantra really is we treat everyone fairly and differently. And it really does come from the generations coming up and saying, look, we're not the same as our parents. And we weren't the same as our parents.
That's true.
I think every generation's job is to drive the previous generation crazy.
Oh, you can go back to the ancient Greeks. They all complained about the income. They're needy. Beginning with Socrates, they all do it. And so I think that's just a thing.
Yeah. Well, this is a thing now that needs a little more attention. We found that, you take a look at millennials in particular, and there's a lot of research and a lot of things have been said. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of the millennial generation.
Me too.
I think they're going to bring us back to civility and kindness.
They have a lot on their shoulders. They got to fix a lot of stuff.
They got a lot to clean up, no doubt about it. This idea that they want to have work that has impact, right? They want to be continually learning and growing. And family's important. That work-life, harmony or balance, whatever you want to call it.
Well, let's just pause there for a moment and think, gee, what did other generations want? Oh, wait, the same thing.
Yes, expressed differently.
Yes.
Expressed differently.
But what's different about this generation is that they're less likely to put up with it. And you have to admire that. Yeah. For a lot of other people, we just put up with whatever it was because we had a pension plan or we had whatever. Oh, we've made 401ks portable and we got rid of your pension plan. So there's nothing keeping you. And for a lot of people, they go, hey, this doesn't align with my values or whatever the other reasons are. And they're willing to walk. And I admire that.
And the old stigma of I've had 5 jobs in 5 years. It's meaningless.
No, that's an amateur.
Yeah.
That's an amateur.
I had a friend call me. He's working in London, and he'd left a job he'd been in for quite a while, and he'd taken a job he thought was a great opportunity. After a year, found it just really wasn't a cultural fit. And another company came after him, and he called me. He says, I worry that I've only been here a year, and I'm leaving. And I said, let me tell you something. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. In fact, they're coming after you. Do you think they care that you've only been there a year? Go and do and be happy and be engaged. We talk about what is an engaged culture, what is a happy culture, and I think it's really boiled down to I believe. So I have a belief. I believe what I do matters. Mm-hmm. I make a difference, and when I made a difference, somebody noticed it and celebrated it.
Yep.
And that's what people are looking for. And by the way, when the supervisor changes, when the CEO changes, when the culture changes, faces change.
Yep.
And for good or ill, unemployment's at all-time lows. People have options.
People have options. And here's the other thing. Most people don't expect a parade. A simple thank you or an acknowledgement is sometimes all they want.
And that's what so many leaders...
Although I love the parades. The marching band, it's beautiful.
Yes.
It's really beautiful.
Yes, and the confetti.
I love it.
And that's what so many leaders don't understand. They think that it's got to be this grand thing. They spend a lot of money on the year-end banquet, and the year-end banquets are great. That's not what's going to really engage your people's hearts and minds. It's that day-to-day, the simple little things, like you say, a simple thank you, a little note, a little call out in a meeting. Pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, I saw what you did, that customer, that was extraordinary. Yep. Giving them time off to spend with their family, a little gift basket to their home. Those simple, random acts of kindness, that's what builds a culture where people wake up and they're excited to go to work. And one little story on that note, very personal for me. So my son Garrett just graduated, got married. He's got his first job down in Austin, Texas. He's in video production and marketing. And as they're making new friends down there in Austin, he said, Dad, it's really interesting. He says that we've got a lot of friends that are in IT, Austin being quite a tech hub. And he says, they're both working and they're making a lot more money than me and Miley. And he said, you know what? They all hate their jobs. And he said, I'm just delighted that we live within our means. And I get up in the morning and I'm excited to go to work every day. And he says, I'm having a tough time putting a price tag on that. I said, Garrett, don't you ever. Good for you, young man.
Yep. No, it's very true. Because no amount of money removes miserableness.
Right.
If you're miserable all the time, what have you gotten? Because, there are all kinds of costs to that. But
yeah. Couldn't agree more.
So when I know you coach.
Yep.
And so some of the executives that you work with, when you're helping them kind of think through what they need to do to build a kind of culture, you've touched on a few things, appreciation certainly and other things, but, what advice do you give to them to help them understand their role in building the kind of culture that not only becomes a talent magnet, but is a place that's a great place to work?
Well, first and foremost, that words and actions matter. Your words and your actions, as we've talked about, give everybody else permission. It says more than anything about your culture. Secondly, is I tell them that, look, the future of leadership is soft. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that you think of the great leaders that you worked with over time. I guarantee you they had pretty good hard skills. They knew the industry. They knew the ins and outs. That was a ticket to entry. The difference between the good leaders and the extraordinary leaders to me is always been their soft skills. Could they relate to people? Were they good communicators? Were they honest and trustworthy? Gosh, if you don't have that from the get-go, could they relate to people in an emotional way? And I don't mean you stalk them.
That's generally a bad thing.
It
kind of puts a damper.
Yeah, that's kind of a Me Too moment. But what I'm trying to say is that they know enough about you to know what your passions were, your hobbies, how important your family was, what your career trajectory was going to be, where you wanted to be 2 to 3 years from now. And those soft skills are what attracted that great talent and kept that great talent. Now, interestingly enough, number one in those soft skills was their ability to express gratitude. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with you there. Because truly, who wants to work with someone or for someone where it only appears that, you're just that cog in the wheel and it doesn't matter if it's you or the next person. And
we tell the old joke, the hard-line leaders say, well, look, I don't care if people like me. Just as long as they respect me. And I say, yeah, I can imagine, in the afternoon around the water cooler and, Sam and Sue are saying, yeah, boss, I hate that guy's guts. Despicable. Hate him. Hate his guts. Got to respect him, though. I mean, that conversation never happens.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe in Dilbert, but not
That
here.
Would be the only place.
Yeah, I think so. I have a question. So a lot of the work that you do talks about ways to effectively recognize and reward people. And, I've seen you in action and, I've heard some of the stories over the years. I wonder if, from your perspective, is it change by generation? Do you think that maybe even not by generation, just now, the culture in which we live and work, has that changed?
Frequency has changed, no question about it. We look at the millennial generation. They need 3 times as much recognition as, say, the baby boomer generation. And I think that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. It's to your point, do we have to throw a parade every time they show up? No, that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for input. Right?
That's exactly right.
They believe they can do more in teams than as individuals, and so they're looking for input. And part of that input is you're on the right track, you're doing great, keep doing it. And so that's the kind of recognition, those simple little touches, the little pats on the little words of encouragement. It doesn't have to be, we're going to give you, a trip to Hawaii because, you showed up 5 days in a row sober.
I'm going to start doing that because I'd love to go to Hawaii. But to your point, I mean, let's be candid. The generation that's now, and these are millennials who are, increasingly more intense levels of leadership. They came in, generally speaking, at the height of a really bad market. They watched parents without a lot of stability in many cases because there's no company loyalty anymore.
None.
They're up to their eyeballs in debt in many cases. They feel more tenuous than perhaps other generations do. And they're looking for feedback and looking for continual development because they want to develop an eminently portable set of skills that allows them to be employed no matter what happens. And I don't blame them.
And see, that's the shift in leadership, is you've got to understand that people aren't going to stay with you for 30 years. It's just not going to happen. And the way you onboard people, the way you welcome them to the company, and even more importantly, the way you say goodbye says so much about your culture. Because you're right. One of the number one reasons for millennials leaving their jobs is nowhere to grow. Now, the cynics say, oh yeah, they want to be the CEO in 3 years. No, they want to develop skills. They want to grow and they want to develop. And if you can put them on a track where they're going to grow and develop, they will stay with you longer. If that growth isn't there and they need to leave, send them off with your best wishes. Let them know that when they've got those skills, they're welcome back. And trust me, people will leave. People will come back if they feel like they can. So often, you leave a company, it's considered a betrayal of the one and only true faith. And that's a huge mistake.
Yeah. Well, listen, they listen to the Siren Song of a recruiter about how incredible the next place is going to be. And maybe you're the only boss they've ever had. And like the best boss in the world because, they've been to your workshops. So they leave thinking it can only get better from here. And then they realize, good bosses are hard to find.
That's right.
And so make it okay for them to come back.
Exactly. We talk about that all the time. Look, you're going to make mistakes. And that's okay. Learn from it and move on.
And don't keep leaving and coming back.
And,
you know what I'm saying?
I mean, if you've left and come back 5 times, okay, that probably says something about, relationships.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, though, Rebecca, and we talk about this often, these simple little acts of kindness from leaders just go such a long way. Little handwritten notes. And I know that is completely retro.
No, I do it. I've seen people, right now we have an open floor plan, but in the old days when we had, different places I've worked and we had an office, people will leave those notes taped up on the walls. And it was like, all right, nobody can be my chicken scratch, but people don't throw those things out.
They don't. They'll put them in their attaboy files, they'll post them. I love leaders that actually write thank you notes to the families and the partners and the support saying, hey, listen, we've gone through a really rough time. We've asked a lot of you, of your spouse, of your partner. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. See, that's somebody that cares. Yeah. And we want to work for somebody that cares.
No, that's fabulous. So, I know that you often say take it home. So talk more about that. So tell me what that means.
Yeah, one of my favorite data points was the study at the University of California, that if you're happy and engaged and motivated at work, you're 150% more likely to be happy and motivated in your personal life. And it makes sense for all the things we've just covered. You're on 24/7. Your smartphone is always on. You're expected to be working no matter where you are, whatever time zone to get back. Well, if you really do believe that what you do matters, if you're motivated around the mission and vision, right? Those principles that create that great culture at work are exactly the same principles that create great family life. We talk about the positive to negative ratio in a workplace that creates a positive workplace, and it's 5 to 1, right? 5 compliments for every 1 criticism is going to keep a positive culture. Well, take that home and say, well, with my partner, what's my ratio? With my kids, what's my ratio?
Right.
And I will tell you a cute story. I was doing this, I think it was Singapore, and I was asking the leadership group, what do you think the ratio should be? And one leader said, well, I think it should be 1 to 1. Because that's balance. For every compliment, there should be a criticism that keeps things in balance. And I asked him, I said, hey, are you married?
Or were you married?
Yeah,
Probably more
try that
accurate.
at home. Because, and we know this even from our Amazon experience, right? I've got a nephew who works at Amazon, and he said, it takes almost 20 5-star reviews to negate a 1-star review. That's the power of negativity. That's the power of, the stick over the carrot. And we know this with our kids. We can be praise, and then we lash out and it crushes them.
Yeah.
And you've got to build it back up. So those simple kinds of things, when you send people home happy, that joy spreads to their families. And when you send them home miserable, I mean, you and I have both had jobs where, at the end of the day, we took all that agita and all that angst and we took it home. And we shared it with every member of our family. And when they were sick and tired of hearing us, we went out and kicked the dog, And the opposite is true. And so I think there is more and more responsibility on us as leaders. Send your people home happy. Because what you do in the workplace ripples through their personal lives. It ripples through their kids, their schools, their coaches. And it is a big responsibility. And yet, those that do it well, with those simple things that you can do, make a difference in people's lives, and I believe generations.
I could not agree more. So, Chester, of all the stuff that you've already done, what are you working on now?
We're always writing. Thanks for asking. I hinted about it a little earlier. We love studying leaders, and through the Marshall Goldsmith group, the MG100, of which you are a proud member. I'm so delighted you're a part of it.
I don't know how I squeak through, but there we are.
Oh, yeah, listen, they don't invite you if you're not deserving. Trust me, you're going to fit in just great. In this Pay It Forward, we had a chance to meet, Alan Mulally, the guy that saved Ford, and Gary Ridge, and Dr. Jim Kim, the head of the past head of the World Bank. These were remarkable leaders, and see them up close. And we took a look and said, what are the differences between just the good and the extraordinary leaders? And again, it was their soft skills. And number 1 in the soft skills was gratitude. So we've got a new book that's coming out. It won't be out till March, but it's up on Amazon, called Leading with Gratitude, the 8 best practices of the best leaders that drive extraordinary results. And we've divided it into 3 areas. One is the myths around leading with gratitude. In other words, fear and compensation are the best motivators, which a lot of leaders still fall back on. 2, some of the best practices, assuming best intent. I love the leaders that say, look, call me crazy. I just don't think people wake up in the morning and say, my goal today, screw up at work.
Make others miserable.
I'm going to check that box as soon as I get there. You know what I'm saying? And then the third part, which our publisher, HarperCollins, was delighted. We weren't sure how big we would make it, is that third section, take it home. The myths, the best practices, take it home. We're very excited about it because I honestly believe that if we can get more leaders leading with gratitude, not only does it create better workplaces, it creates better families, better communities, better cities, better countries. And I think that's our mission.
Well, what a great way to end our conversation today. That's, I think, just a tremendous piece of wisdom because everything we do has a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you know what? Nobody does more to touch people's hearts and minds than my good friend Rebecca Ray.
You're very sweet.
She brings these conferences together. If you have a chance to go to one of these engagement conferences at the conference board, you will see remarkable people doing remarkable work. Most of the news we get in our phone, 90% is negative. Yeah. And yet there's never been a better time to be alive than right now. And if you want to sample some of that goodness, go to a conference board conference. I guarantee you will leave a better person than you went in.
Well, you're very sweet, but it is an awful lot of committed people. It always takes a village, doesn't it?
Yep.
So thank you, Chester.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. And I would encourage those who are listening to this podcast to continually check the website and take a look at our other webcasts and podcasts. You can download, get us on iTunes. And so I hope you'll take advantage of this. We try to give you just a little bit of time with some of the world's best thinkers, and we could not be more pleased to bring this series to you, and I could not be more happy to have had Chester Elton with us today. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
This has been A Conversation With, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.